In the last video, we learned how to create new objects and initialize variables within them. Now we initialize the variables by typing the name of the reference object, followed by the dot operator, then the variables we were going to initialize, followed by an assignment operator, followed by the value we were giving the variable, and here is an example of that. So in this case, the instantiated reference object would be me, and then in order to access all the variables and methods and everything that object has to offer, we use a dot operator, followed by what we wanted to access, so whether it be a method or a variable, in this case the variable age. So now that we have access to this variable, and since it's not already initialized, we can initialize it ourselves by using the assignment operator, followed by whatever value we want to give to this variable. So in this case, age would be 19. And that is how we accessed a variable inside of an object. Now what we're going to do today is bypass that whole giving the information through the main method waste of time. Although one might want to do that, a fast way to pass in information to an object is by creating a constructor. Now if you remember from the methods video that I made a few days ago, we passed information into a method by having the method ask for some variables, and then we typed the values of those variables that it was asking for inside the parentheses when we called the method. Now a constructor is pretty much the same thing. We use the constructor to give variables a value when we create an object. So you know how when we created an object in the last video, but we typed in empty parentheses? In this video, we're going to pass in information this time. So first of all, let's go into our human class. If you haven't made it already, just make it. And first things first, let's make a few variables that we want each reference object to have. So for the sake of the video, we're going to do private string name, private int age, and private int weight. You know, just the basic stuff. And make sure you spell everything correctly. So we made our variables. Now let's make our constructor. Now the syntax for the constructor goes as follows. It's the name of the current class file that you're in, followed by parentheses, followed by braces. So it's pretty much a method in its syntax. So let's type it right now. So it's the name of the class, followed by parentheses, followed by braces. Now at the moment the constructor is empty, but since we want to pass in the information for the variables, we have to make the constructor ask. It's the same way when we want a method to ask for a variable, and you guys already know how to do that. So inside the parentheses, type in the corresponding data types, followed by the identifiers for the variables that we want this constructor to ask for whenever you create a new object. So we want it to ask for a string variable, and we might as well call it name. We also want it to ask for an integer value. We might as well call it age. And we also want it to ask for another integer value, and we're going to call this one weight. Now this is where things might start to get a bit confusing. So inside of the braces of the constructor, we need to initialize the class variables. That is these over here. Now you know how to do that. We type the name of the variable, followed by an assignment operator. But with the constructor, we can pass in the information to be the values of which these variables will be assigned with. But first, in order to access the variables of the class that we are currently working in, we need to use the this keyword. The this keyword allows us to reference all of the contents of the instance of the object we are currently dealing with. So in order to access this variable over here, either the name, age, or weight variable, we will type this followed by the dot operator, followed by the variables we want access to. Now what you have to realize is that these variables over here are not the same variables as here. These variables inside of the constructor are local variables to the constructor. And these variables over here are local variables to the human class. You see, if I were to type another integer value called private int age again, it would give me an error because that's a duplicate value or a duplicate field. But I'm allowed to type it inside the constructor with no problem. That's because they're completely different things. Even though they have the same name, they're referencing completely different objects. So just as you guys would initialize the value of the name variable over here just by typing like something simple as name is assigned the value of the string of Mike. Now in order to access this name variable, we have to type this dot name is assign the value to name. Now let me just reiterate what this means. This dot name is referencing the name variable of this object, more specifically this class, which is the human class. So it's not referencing this name, it's referencing the name of the object. So it gets out of the constructor and goes to the variable name inside the human class. And it assigns it the value of the name given by the constructor. That's why it's just name without this keyword. So let's initialize all of our variables. So in order to reference these variables over here, we type this, because we're referencing the current object that we're working with, dot name is assigned the value of name. And this name variable right here, it isn't referencing this name over here, because it isn't a value. It's referencing this name right here that will be given to us through the constructor. So let's do the same exact thing for age and weight. And there we go. This variable is assigned the value of what we pass in through the constructor, and this variable over here is going to be given the value of what we pass in to the constructor over here. So now that we've created our constructor, let's go into the main method and create an object of type human. So you guys know how to do that. You just type the name of the class we will be referencing, an identifier for, in this case, just Mike, and that is assigned the value of a new human object. Now we get an error because we haven't given the object the required information that it asks for because of the constructor. So since the constructor is asking for a string and 2 integer values, let's pass in that information. So first thing it asks for is a string. So let's do that, Michael, which is my name. Then of course it asks for an age, I'm 19. And then it asks for a weight, and I'm currently 168 pounds, which is around 75 kilos for all you in the metric land. So now that we've created an object with all the relevant information it needs, let's create a method inside of the human class to display all the information. Now I'm sure you can do this on your own, or at least try to, so pause the video and come back when you're done. So we have our object, we have our method, now let's just call the method from the object that we just created to display all the information. And here's the display info method that I just created. Yours should look something like this. So let's go into our main method, type Mike, and in order to access all of its contents, we use the dot operator, which is a period, and then we execute, or we call the display info method. So let's run this, and it should display everything. It says my name is Michael, I'm 19, and I weigh 168, with that typo right there. So it works. Now this is quite confusing, so let me go over it one more time. By instantiating the human class in the main class with the name Mike, we created a new reference object of type human because it references every single thing that the human class has to offer. Now since the human class has a constructor, it will call it and require the information we said it to need. That is why we pass in the corresponding information into the parameters. Now this information will become the value of the variables we declared inside of the human class. We did this by initializing the variables inside of the constructor and assigning them the value of the information it gets from when we instantiate the object and pass in the information. So now that these variables are initialized, we can use them. So we simply just send a message to the console with them, as we have done countless times before. So let me just show you the cascading waterfall of things that occur from when you run the program. So as you know, when you run a Java program, the first thing it looks for is the main method, and in this case it is found in the launcher class. So it looks for the main method, executes every single thing inside of that. So when it gets down to this, so this is what happens. You create a new reference object of type human with an identifier of Mike, so you're just creating a new object with the name Mike, and you assign that the value of a new human object. Now if this object did not have a constructor, you would just have empty parameters. But since in this case we built a constructor, it asks for some variables, or some values for variables. So we type in Michael, 19, and 168. So at this moment, this constructor has this information. It has Michael, it has 19, and it has 168. So now it asks, what am I going to do with this information? Do you want me to calculate something? Do you want me to store it? And in this case, it takes the information that we give to it and initializes these declared variables over here with that information. And we just do this by initializing the variables by typing this dot name is assign the value of the information that we're passing in. So after all of that is said and done, we have a new human object with these 3 declared variables having values, which with we could then display the info of by calling this method. And that is that. So that's the video. Play around with it, make a bunch of objects and pass information to them, make a few constructors, and display all of that information. So I hope you learned something. I know when I first encountered constructors by watching some YouTube videos, like it took me a couple weeks to fully understand it. Because like when I first watched it, I was like, oh yeah, I get it. But I really didn't get it. And when I finally understood it, I was like, god damn, that shit's fucking genius. But aside from that, if you have any questions or if you had difficulty with understanding everything that I just said, just make sure to ask a few questions in the comments below. And make sure to subscribe and like for more Java tutorials. So, till next time, peace.